Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Fitz.
And welcome to Point of View on this Wednesday, October 31st, 2018 day. Happy Halloween to our listeners. I'm so grateful that you decided to join us today. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, and we are so excited to have in studio with us during the first hour, we've got Jasmine Tate, who is a singer, songwriter, blogger, and speaker. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about the arts with her, especially on this spooky day that is Halloween, which for some is a day to be able to go, it's your dentist's worst nightmare, because you are going to be assaulting your teeth with technologically enhanced sugar products that are delectable and a reminder of God's goodness and grace on this earth. And then for others, this is going to be the kickoff to the holiday season, where we are going to start singing Michael Bublé and I'll Be Home for Christmas, et cetera, et cetera. But regardless of whatever the day is, we're so thankful that you decided to join us today, and we're especially thankful that Jasmine is here with us. And so during the first hour, we will talk with her, and then coming up in the second hour, we'll have Kerby Anderson will be joining me here in studio for the Millennial Roundtable, and then we will get to some other issues that are kind of percolating in the news cycle, specifically the idea of the ending the birthright citizenship that was postulated by Senator Lindsey Graham, the senator out of South Carolina. And then we'll also talk a little bit about the caravan, specifically the upwards of 5,000 to 7,000 individuals that find themselves marching through Mexico right now and to the border. And what does that look like from a Christian perspective? That living in the midst of the tension of wanting to heed the rule of law and honor the authorities that have been placed in, and the rules that have been placed therein as well, from 1 Peter 2 and Romans 13. But also on the flip side, it is you would have to close your eyes to not see compassion for the foreigner and stranger in the biblical narrative. And so what does it look like to live in that tension and to be a stranger and a foreigner in a different land? And so we'll be talking a little bit about that as well, but that'll be during the second hour. But I am so excited that we have Jasmine Tate here today. So Jasmine, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking.
So good. So good to see you. So good to see you. Now, this is, if you've been listening in long enough, you know that sometimes I feel like some of our conversations are best done. I wish our conversations were live during the breaks, because we were right before the show got started. It was just so delightful to talk to her. So help us understand, Jasmine. Tell us a little bit about yourself. You're not originally from here, but similar to what most Texans would say, you got here as quickly as you could.
That's right.
So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it really feels like that. I love Texas. I've been here since April. I moved here from Pennsylvania, spent some time in Pittsburgh and some time in Philly, which I know you're not happy about. I hope you'll forgive me for my Eagles positioning.
I know.
It's okay.
We'll pray for you.
But yeah, so I just moved here in April and spent some time there, but I was raised in Columbus, Ohio.
Okay.
So I grew up there, went to college in Pittsburgh, and then got a job in Philly working with creatives and artists, and it's kind of how I got there. But some friends of mine are planning a church here in Fort Worth, or I guess over in Fort Worth.
Yeah.
We're in Dallas right now. And so they invited me to just pray about joining them, kind of overseeing the worship team and the creative arts community there. So I prayed about it and felt led to come.
Okay,
so
you're telling me you were in north, so you were north of the Mason-Dixon line. We'll just go ahead and put it like that. So you were north in Philadelphia, Pittsburgh area, and then you were also in the corporate world, and so then you transitioned to not only a different state, but also a different industry as well.
Yeah, well, I was working at another church in Philly.
Okay.
So I was not technically in the corporate world, but we're talking earlier, that was my dream. That's what I wanted to be doing, was working in the corporate world. My family is pretty much all in the corporate world, and I wanted to work for like the entertainment industry and kind of like see the kingdom advance through the entertainment industry, working for like MTV or VH1, something like that, behind the scenes as a creative director.
Okay, that's phenomenal.
So that didn't happen.
And so that didn't happen. You know, they always say if you want to make God laugh, tell him your 5-year plan.
Seriously,
and so we see so there's this transition. So you make your way down to Texas, and so now you're in Fort Worth. And so tell us a little bit about your role here in Fort Worth. Yeah,
so our church doesn't launch until Easter of next year. So right now, what I'm in the process of doing is kind of just building infrastructure and culture around what our worship team will be for our church. And then I have a real passion for equipping creatives and artists and what it looks like to use their gifts to glorify God and shift culture. So I'm working with the church as the overseer of the worship team, but also helping kind of form that kind of creative community, giving people who are creatives permission to be a part of the church, but also find their calling outside of that four-wall Sunday morning expression.
That's rich. Okay, so help us understand a little bit. Now, the worship component wasn't something is interesting to me in the sense that this was something that you've done before, but also you yourself would consider yourself a type of artist as well, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so help us, tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Well, I love leading worship. That's I'm a worshiper first, you know. I love doing that. But I also write songs that don't necessarily fit into that Sunday morning worship expression.
Yeah,
you know?
I think that's an important distinction to be able to make, because sometimes it's not. There's a different style of music that's required on Sunday morning when. And then also throughout the week as well. And so an ability not only to use your talents for the gathering, but also to utilize and deploy your talents as well during the week as well.
Absolutely.
So help us understand, what does that look like for you when you deploy and utilize your talents during the week as being an artist yourself?
Absolutely. So, I mean, there are songs, those songs that I'm talking about that don't necessarily fit into that Sunday morning expression. The reality is, just within the Christian community, we don't just listen to worship songs all the time.
No.
You know, and I think
I'm a country guy. I was listening to country on the way over.
Exactly. And so I think, I mean, I wasn't listening to country. I would, but I wasn't.
I'm sorry. You missed out. No, just kidding.
Right. But I think there is a necessity for there to be songs that fit every single genre, not just the CCM genre, that are teaching kingdom truths and concepts that are biblical. You know what I mean? Values, morals. Every generation is discipled by art, is discipled by something on TV, some type of song that's being played, you know?
Yeah, it's it's a reminder too, and we're coming up on a break, but it's a reminder that we're being shaped regardless of whether we recognize it or not.
Yes.
We're being shaped not only by what we listen to, but by the people that we surround ourselves with, by what we watch, by what we see in our hands, which also have the smartest computer in the history of the world that's just conveniently pocket-sized. So we're all being shaped, and also we come together on Sunday morning or whatever time that is with your body of believers. You come together and you're intentionally aware that you're being shaped. There's words that are being spoken over you. There's songs that are being spoken. There are prayers that are being prayed over you that help shape your understanding of who God is and what God requires of you. And so I think that's a really good point. And that's one of the things I want to tease out during the next segment is I want us to help us to better understand the distinction that needs to be made between individuals that are Christians who just happen to be artists and artists who just happen to be Christians. And so help us make that distinction a little bit, but then also help us to see the significance of what you're doing on Sunday as well as what you're doing Monday through Saturday as well. It reminds me of the quote from Kuyper. There's not one square inch over the whole human existence over which God doesn't say mine. And so what does it look like to live a life that's pleasing to him both inside and outside the four walls? But we've got to take a break. But when we come back from the break, we'll have Jasmine Tate here, and we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
What does it take for normal people to start slaughtering others? A commentary in the Jerusalem Post with the title The Genocide Mechanism showed how demonization could lead to genocide. The writer talked about a very specific kind of demonization, and the example he used was Rwanda. In 1994, the majority Hutu population was able to massacre some 800,000 Tutsis. The violence was unimaginable. Neighbors slaughtering neighbors, mostly with machetes. The estimates are about 9,000 men, women, and children were slaughtered every day. How does something so awful happen? Well, the answer is demonization. The Hutus were taught that the Tutsis were cockroaches and snakes. Tutsi women were portrayed as cunning seductresses who used beauty and sexual powers to conquer the Hutus. There were also warnings on the radio that the Tutsis were about to attack them, so they needed to attack first to protect themselves. Step 1 was to dehumanize the enemy with all sorts of false statements. Step 2 was to present a clear danger. Then you merely need to convince people that they need to act in their own self-defense. The commentary explains how this type of demonization has been used by Hamas and the Palestinian Authority to describe Jews as loathsome and dangerous animals. Could something like this happen in this country? We would hope not. But you do see some similarities. Look at how the left portrays President Trump, Republican members of Congress, and even conservative speakers on college campus. They are the equivalent of Hitler. They're not worthy of any respect and represent a clear and present danger to various sectors of society. They want to put people in detainment camps and even march them off to gas chambers. This is the reminder that hateful words and demonization can lead to horrific acts against other human beings. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Graceworks Pictures, Indivisible, based on the true story of Army Chaplain Darren Turner and his wife Heather. Rated PG-13. Now playing. IndivisibleMovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined here at the Millennial Roundtable with Jasmine Tate, who is a singer, songwriter, blogger, speaker. Recently came down here from Pennsylvania and now finds herself helping launch a church in the Fort Worth area. And so Jasmine and I have been talking a little bit about just her journey of being up north, eventually making her way down here. Jasmine, similar story. I came from Tennessee and I followed Davy Crockett, and hopefully not going to suffer the same fate as him. And so we, it was a great time to get down here to Texas. But one of the things I'm most interested in what you are doing, and also what you've articulated in the previous segment, as well as when we were off line, I guess you would say, is this reality of there's a Christian artist and then there's an artist who just happens to be Christian. Tease that out for us a little bit, just because I think our audience, sometimes it can be a difficult distinction to be able to make. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think, so for me, I was kind of telling you a little bit about my journey, but when I started doing music, I thought that because I was playing the guitar and singing, that meant that I had to lead worship on Sunday or be like a CCM, which means Christian Contemporary Music artist on K-Love or something like that. That's just the only context that I had, or gospel artist, fit into one of those boxes. And the reality is the songs that I was writing, they didn't fit into any of those boxes at all. They were songs that people who never stepped foot in a church, that didn't want anything to do with Christians or churches or anything religious, that they could still listen to and be inspired, be touched, be whatever, by the songs, by the lyrics. And I just thought that was amazing. And the more I started doing it and going to open mics and playing shows and stuff, I started meeting this whole community
of other artists that were like me, that they grew up thinking that they had to be a worship leader, but the songs they were writing didn't fit into that box. And so I think that the line between those two terms that you said, Christians who are Christian artists and then artists who happen to be Christians, it's just one of my favorite conversations, because I think it's not talked about enough.
Yeah, there's so I think for some of our audience, they would probably recognize like a U2, right? U2's been so at the forefront of trying to do good in the world, and then also produce good music for the world, but they have not been known as the Christian band.
Yes.
They're just producing really good music. They're just a bunch of guys who just happen to be Christian. For some of our younger audience, I always go back to the band Mumford & Sons.
Yeah.
Mumford & Sons is like I pulled up a lyric right now. So Mumford & Sons, you might find them on Christian radio, but their primary home is on mainstream radio. It would be on the I don't even know what stations they would be. You don't want to turn those stations anyway because you want to be listening to us. And so there's a lyric that they have in a song, "Beautiful Wonder." They say, "Your beauty trumped my doubt." And it was just it's not explicitly biblical, but it is a biblical principle of that. You can't help but think about Saul when he's on his way to Damascus, right? Like the beauty of God was something that caused him to be blinded, and then like scales fell from his eyes, and like he doubted the God of the universe, and inevitably he becomes one of the greatest proponents and advocates for the God of the universe. You think about individuals like Gideon, and God continuing to be patient with him and show continual signs to him, and meets Gideon where he is, may it be through the dew on the ground or the people that are scooping up. And so that's what I find so interesting. And I would argue, Jasmine, that it's especially needed today, right? Because increasingly more and more millennial Christians, younger Christians, millennials, and then individuals that are younger, the iGen, aren't going into church, aren't tuning into Christian radio stations, but rather it requires us, then it's on us, the onus is on us to go to them, right?
Yes, versus creating this subculture where we're not engaging culture at all, And I think there are I meet a lot of millennials that this does something in them, this conversation, because they are creatives beyond just singer-songwriters, but they're graphic artists, they're dancers, they're painters, and their expression doesn't fit into the Sunday morning thing that we've created anyway. And so it's like, unless we teach them, hey, you can actually use this for God in culture, what happens is they use it and they leave church and they just use it for the world anyway. Instead of us equipping them and teaching them like, hey, there's a place for this in the body, and it doesn't have to fit into our Sunday morning thing in order for it to be effective to changing the world for good,
So I think about some of the stuff, like what I do. So one of the things that I do is I write the daily briefing, which is just an overview of the news, and it's an email format. That's not for a Sunday morning gathering. Nobody needs to be reading all those social science statistics. Nobody needs to be wading into political waters every day or every Sunday on the Sunday morning, but it's being redeemed by a church, right? And so I want to be able to be encouraged by the church, to be blessed by the church, but then to be sent by the church, right? I'm reminded, especially on this day, we have Martin Luther. He says that there comes a day when Jesus says, come and see, and eventually he says, go and die. It's the thing, like, come and see the goodness of the Lord, and then go and die to yourself. And so you're leaving, but it's not as though you're leaving. It's rather that God is just leading you more than you're leaving him. And so, especially when I think about artists, for example, so what does it look like? What are you envisioning in Fort Worth for this gathering of artists to be gathering together, to be empowered, to be able to be free, to kind of to express and utilize their talents for the glory of God and for the good of the world? Yeah,
I mean, I see a community where people are being equipped. We're having these types of conversations, just talking about this stuff, because nobody's really people. There aren't a lot of conversations happening about it. So just opening up the space for that, but then also, when somebody has a show at the altar bar, because they do this, and they don't do it on a Sunday morning, we send a group of people with them, so they're not by themselves. You know what I mean? Because that's part of the battle too. It's like, man, you want to use your gift for the glory of God, in culture. But Jesus didn't even send the disciples by themselves.
No.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so these people who don't feel like they have a place in the church, they just go and try to figure it out on their own because nobody's talking about it, nobody's doing it. We don't want that to happen. We want to send other people who are also equipped and understanding this concept to go and support and to pray with them before their show and to love on people in the bar with them while they're there and pray for people if it comes up, if it's necessary or whatever,
That's such like a great point because, again, it kind of hits on two areas. One, I think it hits on the idea, I guess at three areas, but we'll just signify two for right now. One, to encourage the artists that the people are there, right? It's the incarnation. It's one of the most beautiful aspects of who God is, that he incarnated himself. He became our Emmanuel. And the greatest gift you can give someone is your presence. That was indicative of what happened on the cross, that Jesus gave himself. And so by us showing up, that's the greatest gift that we can give for individuals. And then on the flip side, too, it offers up the chance to be the fragrant aroma of Christ in a place that probably smells like spilled beer.
Yeah, for real.
And there's the accountability that comes in the numbers component, one. And then two, it just is it's a very neat opportunity for individuals to be able to have conversations that they wouldn't otherwise be happening because people aren't going to church right now.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what happens, when we go to those places. I have a show at the Altar Bar or the Prophet Bar. Altar Bar is in Pittsburgh. The Prophet Bar, Altar Bar, Prophet Bar. I have a show there this week, and when we go to places like that, there are people that are in the crowd that they don't go to church because they hate it. They got hurt by people there, and so they get rocked, they feel so loved because we're not ashamed of the gospel. We're not ashamed of Jesus, but we're also not going to bash a Bible down anybody's throat, just to love people. And they get so moved by that, know?
It's kindness that leads to repentance, right? I didn't come into the world to judge the world. I didn't come into the world to judge or condemn the world. I came to save the world. It's this idea of just being that gracious presence of God in that place. And I think to a certain degree, just because individuals just largely aren't interacting with Christians anymore, just because there's fewer in number of us, taking away the stigma that we're overtly weird.
Yeah, for real. Talk about it. It's so real.
Yeah, it's
I mean, when you have people say to you, I can't believe you're a Christian. You're just cool. Like, you're not weird. I'm like, wow,
It's like the Ned Flanders syndrome that we've got right now, where they just think that we're weird. And I think a part of it is that, one, there's been the subculture of it, like we just cloistered ourselves off. But then, two, I think another part is just we're fewer in number now. There's just not as many of us that there used to be. And because of that, I mean, we see this in the political sphere. We see this in all spheres. When you don't know somebody, you dehumanize them. And then you have these caricatures that built up that really it's just not it's not an accurate representation. It lends itself to what probably my favorite term right now is called nut picking, where you pick outlier instances to represent the whole movement. And so you got all Christians now are individuals that go to Westboro Baptist Church, which is the most inaccurate thing from it. But nevertheless, we have got to take a break. But when we come back from the break, we're going to continue talking with Jasmine Tate a little bit more about what does it look like from a millennial perspective, but also from a worship perspective, to be able to deploy your gifts to the glory of God and the good of the world. We'll be back right after this.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, and so grateful that you have decided to join us today on this Halloween edition of the Millennial Roundtable. And so as millennials, I feel like it's only necessary for us to emphasize the authenticity of this. And since we have Jasmine Tate in studio, she is a singer-songwriter, blogger. I think one of the things that we'll have to address, especially on Halloween, is your worst Halloween costume, right? Like, I think we're going to have to do that right now. And so I'll let you think about it for a little bit. But one of the things that I'll go ahead and tell you is I've had some awful Halloween costumes over the years. And so specifically, probably one of the worst ones I would go was probably the whoopee cushion. One might say just kind of airballed on that one. I thought it most reflected my character to a certain degree. Inappropriate, a little bit loud, and probably only appeals to a segment of the population. And so I think that was the reason why I went the whoopee cushion. I didn't get any candy from it, but I did get a hard time from my fraternity brothers for it. But nevertheless, okay, so the question goes to you. What's the most embarrassing, worst Halloween costume?
I dressed up once as William Hung.
Okay. I don't
know if y'all remember William Hung.
That's the American Idol guy. Yeah. He tried to impersonate Ricky Martin. Yeah. He was not living La Vida Loca. But yeah, nevertheless.
She bangs.
Yeah, she bangs. Ooh, babe. Yeah. Just it left a little to be desired, but it kind of reminds us of the false encouragement, right? Yeah. Like you don't want people to kind of fan the flame. It's not really lit.
I had good friends. They told me it was not a good situation.
I love it. Okay, so Jasmine, we've been talking about a couple of things during the previous segments. One of those being kind of your journey from the Pennsylvania area, Pittsburgh, and then making your way down here to the Dallas area. Now you're in Fort Worth, and you're launching a church, and you're kind of leading up the worship collective there, trying to help empower artists to be able to utilize their gifts for the glory of God and the good of the world. We talked about some of the ways that we're making distinctions between being a Christian artist and an artist who just happens to be Christian. And I'll go ahead and I'll kind of just assume that this can be kind of a difficult road, simply because I know that I can think about in my own hometown, if it's not explicitly saying Jesus, there's kind of a populist uproar that kind of moves forward. Like, well, you're not really using your talents and skill sets if you're not explicitly calling out the name of the Lord. And so help us to understand from your perspective, as you're kind of forming, you've been in the community obviously for a time, worship community for a time, and then now you've moved to a different local community. What are some of the obstacles that you face in kind of doing what you do within this worship community?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a wonderful question. Two things come to mind immediately. One of which you kind of addressed just now is just the reality that there are people who don't understand that approach to art at this point. When I first started doing it, I remember, I would just play at open mics, and they're not Christian open mics at churches. They were like at bars and coffee shops and stuff. And I remember this lady from the church that I grew up in, she messaged me, and she basically said, just questioning my faith, like concern for my love for Jesus, that I was playing at bars and just stuff like that. Wow. And so I just think there's a reality. There are people who just don't understand it. And so I was heartbroken because I was in the process when I first started where, we would go into these places and play, and I experienced people deciding to follow Jesus and give their life to Jesus in bars and crying because they are experiencing the love of God in places like that. So I'm like, man, this lady doesn't even get to hear those testimonies and those stories of what God is doing because there's such a block from what it can look like. And I think along with that, when I'm working with other artists and trying to teach them, something that one of my mentors said once is, you shouldn't take a dim light into a dark place. And so I think it is tricky when there are people who maybe they're a little shaky in their walk with the Lord, and there are things that they're compromising in. There's values and standards that they're compromising in. It is a little hard to be a bright light when you're dimmed
Yeah.
in a dark place. You know what I mean? And so I can understand the concern for people who maybe aren't strong in their faith going into places like that and trying to minister to people or love on people that are in those places. You know, it's like drowning and trying to save somebody who's drowning. You know what I mean? So that's been a hard part of it. And the other thing that I would say that's been difficult is we put people in compartments. We categorize people. It's a natural part of, it's like our innate human nature. And so people try to put my music in boxes. They try to figure it out. Like, is this a gospel artist, or is she CCM, or like, is it pop, or like what? Where do we put her? And that's hard with like record labels and those types of conversations, because you can't. I'm not gonna try to just be one thing. I'm gonna sing the songs that I feel like God has given me to sing. And let it fall, let the pieces fall where they may. You know. So
yeah, I think that would be one of the difficult things, especially from a business perspective, right? Because a business perspective, you want to be able to identify an audience, and for better or for worse, there's already predetermined audiences.
Yes.
And especially if you have a particular gifting or skill set that doesn't really fit neatly into any particular box, it just requires a little bit of creativity and also some patience with that as well. And so there's kind of a working together on that side. And so, I think that would be very interesting. And so what have you found to be helpful for individuals that might be listening right now that kind of do have that bent, that they're not Christian artists, they're artists who just happen to be Christians that want to do really good work and not necessarily be not so secret agents for the kingdom in the places that they're going? What would be some of the pieces of advice that you would give to individuals that would be trying to make their way into this space? And then maybe it would be one of two ways. One, personally, but then also if they're trying to lead in that effort as well. What would you offer to them? Yeah,
absolutely. Great question. I would say I love finding other artists who are doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So you just named Mumford & Sons. You know, 21 Pilots is a band like that. My friend Lacey used to be in a band called Flyleaf. They used to do things like that. There's there are a lot of bands that do that. Need to Breathe. They're kind of a bridge band. They're high in CCM, but they're on mainstream radio stations as well. So I would find artists like that and learn what they're doing, learn their approach. If that is the goal, if you want to grow into that type of artist, if it's painting or if it's dancing, just try to find artists that are doing that and learn from them. Ask to connect with them. Ask them questions. You know, there's another artist named Joy Ike who I connected with. She's phenomenal, and she's based in Philly. And when I first started doing music, I like stalked her on Instagram and was like, "Can you please teach me? Like, just teach me what you're doing, you know?" And I would just learn from her, you know. So I would encourage people to do that. But also, I would just say, don't try to be authentic. You know, don't try to be something you're not. Don't try to fit into a box that somebody else is creating for you, you know? One of the things that, again, like, I think it's just increasingly important that if you're going to be authentic, you've got to continue to be authentic, and authenticity is not just the conduit to be able to be popular. Right? So like when you become popular, then you lose your authenticity, because then you just give people what you want. Which I think the biblical narrative would condemn very harshly, specifically in Galatians 1. And so there's this mentality of being authentic. But I'm always, especially for millennials that say that, one of the things that I'm always cognizant of is that what Mark Twain said, like, if I have to disturb the silence, I want to be beneficially disturbing the silence. And so with authenticity, I find that I don't want to just create more noise in the culture. I want to contribute to the quiet that might exist in the culture, especially in this very loud world that we're living in. And so I would imagine you would echo that from an artist perspective. I want to add to the silence. I don't want to take away from the silence, because in a very loud culture, it's a high premium right now. And I think as an artist, this is kind of going into a different thing slightly, but like, there is a lot of pressure because of how loud everything is to do certain things with your influence or with your gift. So for me, as a Black woman that plays the guitar and sings, there's a lot of different pressure points of like, you need to fit in the gospel, and there's like racial issues that you need to use your platform to talk about and sing about. But the reality is, if it's not an authentic thing that I feel like God has called me to use my voice for, then I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to be like Goliath when God's called you to be David, right?
Yes.
Like, I think that was one of the biggest things that people tried to do to David. They were like, why don't you put on Saul's armor?
Yes.
Saul's armor. Well, no, I don't want to use Saul's armor.
Yes.
I've got a slingshot that I've been given, and I want to use the slingshot. I don't want to use Saul's sword. And so, being you, recognizing what are the gifts that God has put inside of me and the propensities that He's framed me with, and how do I use those to extend His kingdom for the benefit of the world. And so we're going to have to take a break, but when we come back from the break, we're going to talk more with Jasmine Tate. And I want to be sure that you can tune in on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio, or call in 800-351-1212. And we'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The U.S. Department of Justice recently announced that it will update the U.S. Attorney's Manual, creating a new section giving special attention to religious liberty. Updates to such a manual are sometimes viewed as routine, but they tend to reflect the values and priorities of the Department of Justice and function as a sort of roadmap for the department's coming years. The updates announced in the new manual requires the nation's U.S. attorneys to not only identify a dedicated point of contact on litigation having to do with religious liberty, but also requires coordination of any such litigation directly with the central office in Washington, D.C. In other words, Attorney General Sessions is announcing that his office will be very hands-on in lawsuits involving our first freedom. When the Department of Justice announced the updated U.S. Attorney's Manual, then Associate Attorney General Rachel Brand explained, quote, "Religious liberty is an inalienable right protected by the Constitution, and defending it is one of the most important things we do at the Department of Justice." Clearly, the days of abandoning protections in the law for religious liberty, including bipartisan laws like the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, may be a thing of the past. The critical leadership of the Attorney General and his staff to protect religious liberty for all Americans will do much to strengthen all of our core freedoms. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. On this Halloween day, we are so grateful that you decided to join us for this Millennial Roundtable edition of the Point of View show. I'm joined here by Jasmine Tate here in studio. She is a artist, singer, songwriter, leading up the worship collective at a church plant here in the Fort Worth area. And on this Halloween day, we started off last segment figuring out what is the most embarrassing costume, but we're going to push it towards a more controversial issue right now. And since yesterday was Candy Corn Day, and now there are going to be a multitude of people handing out candy, we need to figure out, Jasmine, what is your favorite candy for Halloween?
Oh, yeah,
you've already got this.
Controversial.
Yeah, you've already got this. I can tell.
No, because I feel like I'm slightly being manipulated because I know your favorite candy, and I feel like you want me to say that.
Okay, yeah.
And I can't.
You can't say candy
it's
corn.
not true.
Okay.
And I can't say Peeps either.
Oh, Peeps. Okay. Well, this has been a great interview. We got to go to early commercial break. No, I'm just kidding.
No, I'm a Kit Kat girl.
Kit Kat. Okay.
I can eat Kit Kat all day, every day.
Give me a break. Come on. Seriously, give me a break. Not a Kit Kat. No. Okay. So I enjoy Kit Kat. Don't get me wrong. There's just not enough chocolate for me. It's too skimp on the chocolate. I need something a little bit more substantive. Specifically, I need something, because let's just be honest. Everyone in the listening audience knows that when you combine peanut butter and chocolate together, it's like divinity coming together. It's beautiful. It's a reminder of God's goodness and grace in this broken world.
It's secondary.
And so,
I can't trust the Titans.
Especially put it in a cup. And so, okay, now she went too far with the Titans, as the Titans are going to beat the Cowboys this week, just so you all know. But nevertheless, we have been talking with Jasmine Tate a little bit about her worship and just kind of a different approach to worship, whereby she is not a Christian artist, but an artist just who happens to be Christian, and some of the difficulties she was sharing with us in the previous segment, but also some of the neat opportunities. Jasmine, one of the things I'm most captivated by is I just think that increasingly individuals are not going to church. They're not tuning into kind of some of these Christian subcultures. And sometimes I think when you tap into this, I won't go into that critique, rather. I'll just say this opens up the opportunity for you to do work excellently, and then to be able to distinguish yourself in such a way that kind of, one, eradicates any notions, the preconceived notions individuals have of Christians, but two, offers up a beautiful example for you to be a fragrant aroma of Christ in places that individuals just might not be, right?
Yeah.
And then you can have a compelling message with it as well.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit, what are some of your songs right now? What are some of the things that you've worked on that really that individuals have come along and said, this is really good stuff that you're doing right now?
Absolutely. One of the things that comes to mind is I wrote a song called Daddy.
Okay.
And this song is about my journey with my father, our relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't start off having a good relationship at all. Just a lot of rough stuff happened along the way. And God just kind of led me down this journey of forgiveness with him and just complete restoration of our relationship. He's like, I love this man today. We have like a great relationship, but it just hasn't been that way, you know? And so this song tells the raw reality of the brokenness of our relationship and all the hard things that happen. But the chorus of the song says, oh, Daddy, you're more than your mistakes. Oh, Daddy, I'm sorry for the way you left a space that no man could fill, but God stepped in and showed me how it felt to be a daughter. And so it's just this reality that, like, man, God stepped in and was my father for all these years. However, in the song, it also talks about just the forgiveness piece. But Daddy, I forgive you, you know? And so I sing that song in bars and dark places, people drinking, getting high, whatever. And I'm singing this song, and people, the whole room will just freeze. And because everybody has been affected by relationships with their family, relationships with their father, with their mother, you know, and people will just weep in the room and cry and come up to me at the end and just be like, I texted my dad while you were singing, and our relationship just got fixed because of that text message, because you sang that song. Like, I've literally watched relationships be restored in bars through a song.
Yeah, wow.
You know, like, I didn't preach a message. I didn't tell them, forgive somebody, you've been forgiven much, forgive, you know, but just the song. Yeah,
because I would argue that that's just the way music works. That's the way that art works. Whereas logic and reason typically tends to come in the front door of our mind, art typically tends to come into the back door of our mind. It sneaks up on us. And I think that's the beautiful thing about what music can do and art can do, is it's a subversive truth agent that is able to sneak in and give a message where individuals are just increasingly hardened by that. And especially when you have a message that is so relevant, one, to the culture, and then two, speaks directly into it. So the numbers are clear. It's 41% of Americans, 41% of children that are born today are born into broken families. Wow. There's an absent father, or it's not a married couple. So there's a lot of individuals that are born into precarious situations, one might be able to say. And then coupled with that, like many of us have experienced either 1 or 2 degrees of separation of the divorce situation happening. So many of us are walking into these places with the facades on our faces in order that we might be able to pretend like everything's okay. Yeah. But then music just happens to slip in there and really can speak a message in such a way to bring healing, but also to restore what you almost thought was antiquity from a bygone era, which was called hope. Yes. And that's what your music's doing.
Absolutely. And I mean, I've had fathers come up to me who have great relationships with their kids, bawling because that was what happened to them with their father, and it's inspiring them to not repeat that with their kids, you know? And so I just think there's a quote that you impress me so much with like your quotes and your numbers. I'm like, my brain is like, whoa, this is awesome. Don't have that memorized, but I do got this quote.
Okay,
just don't know who said
it. I like this.
So there's a quote that says, a truth discovered is better kept than a truth told. And I love it so much because I think art, like you were saying, it has the ability to set the table for someone and like just put a bunch of stuff on the table, and then they feel like they discovered it on their own through a song, and they just got it, and they're like, this is my revelation, like this is my truth. And all I did was sing a song that offered just the thought that forgiveness is possible. In this scenario,
it's like in the biblical narrative, right? So you have Jacob that is wrestling with God. He's run away, so he's all by himself. He's just lying there in the middle of the night, and all of a sudden, an angel of the Lord comes and wants to challenge him to a wrestling match. So literally, he's wrestling with an angel of the Lord, and then he's like, God, I imagine, because I'm from Tennessee, they're wrestling together. There's no W on the beginning of that, and they got him in a headlock, and eventually he says, I'm not letting him go until you bless me. Gets blessed. His name is changed. He walks away with a limp, and that's what happens when we wrestle with the God who's truth, right? We walk away differently and blessed by it.
So good.
And so that's like a reality. You're wrestling, causing people to wrestle by picking a fight with them, but in reality, you're not picking a fight with them. You're introducing them to the God that fights for them.
So
right?
good. I love that. I love that. And it also reminds me of just Jesus' approach. You know, he's with the disciples. There's this crowd of people, and he's just telling these stories. You know, he's just telling the stories, and I don't remember exactly where it is, like you probably would. But one of the disciples says to him, like, why do you keep telling these stories? He seems kind of irritated. You know, he's like, stop, what's with the stories? And he tells them, well, it's because you guys already know these things. But like, essentially, there's something for them to discover. I'm telling them stories because I want them to discover the truth. I want them to discover the kingdom here. And so I think as a songwriter, I love the opportunity that's presented to tell parables with a guitar and to make space for people to discover truth, you know, to discover the kingdom, to discover forgiveness, to discover that there's only one way, that is Jesus, just through a song that may not even say his name, you know?
Yeah, similar to the book of Esther, right? Would never say his name, but then you can't. He is undeniably present in the midst of the story. Jasmine Tate, it has been such a delight to have you here with us. And so if you want to find out more information on Jasmine, you can go to the Point of View website, pointofview.net. But when we come back, we'll have David Fraga, as well as we will have Nick and Kerby Anderson in studio. We'll be back right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate 2 replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts. And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, on this Wednesday, October 31st, 2018 day. Happy Halloween to our audience here going into the second hour. This will be the first hour for most of you nationally, but we are so excited that Dallas audience and Minnesota audience has decided to stick around a little bit longer. We're so grateful that Jasmine Tate was with us during the first hour. We talked a little bit about the distinction that has to be made between a Christian artist and an artist who just happens to be Christian, and some of the great work that she's doing, very similar to Esther in Fort Worth area. What's fascinating with what she's doing is she's not explicitly using the name of God, but she's putting forward just kind of the rhythms of God in her music and seeing some great results out of that. And so I want to encourage you to go onto the Point of View website, pointofview.net, and you can listen to that during the first hour. But here during the second hour, there's a couple of things happening around the world, and specifically in the political world as well. And I'm joined in the roundtable by Kerby Anderson. Kerby, how are you today?
I'm doing very well, but I do have a question. I was reading this Daily Briefing. I know the guy that writes it here. And he says 86% of parents shamelessly steal candy from their children's Halloween haul.
And then
now, what is the penalty for that? And for those of us over the years that have drugged those kids around, why can't we have at least a little bit of one of the Snicker bars?
So
I want to know this.
Here's what I would say to this. When I read that survey, it said 86% of parents admitted to stealing kids.
Yeah, but you put shamelessly in there.
Other people have found 14% are liars. I would say 100%. And so that's why I have trust issues.
That's on the Daily Briefing today if people want to read all about it. I thought it was pretty funny.
But nevertheless, we've got Kerby Anderson that's joining us, and David Fraga as well. David, how are you today?
I'm fantastic. Glad to be back.
So good to have you. So good to have you. And so we are going to be talking a little bit about this kind of the explosive exclusive that is increasingly becoming very consistent out of Axios right now. Axios, Jonathan Swan broke the story on Monday morning about President Trump and their interview, indicating that he's wanting to sign an executive order or potentially move legislation from the Lindsey Graham perspective out of the Senate to end birthright citizenship, kind of centered on that idea of the 14th Amendment and what that would look like. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that, and we'll also talk about the looming caravan that finds itself wading through Mexico right now and making its way to the American border. What will that look like? We know that President Trump has already deployed thousands of troops that are already joining, 16,000 upward, Border Patrol agents, 200 watercraft vehicles, 300 towers, and 900 miles worth of fence. And so or 671 miles worth of fence. And so what does that look like in particular? And so we'll be talking a little bit about that as well. But we'll also be opening up the phone lines so that you can call in. So you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, 800-351-1212, or facebook.com/pointofviewradio. For those of you listening on Facebook, you can just leave a little message underneath that live video feed, and what you say online we'll try to get to over air as well. But let's go ahead and let's jump on over to the birthright citizenship, Kerby. I think that was one of the interesting things that we heard about during the campaign of 2016, and that's one of the things that we also know about President Trump. He has been delivering on his promises, and so what he said on the campaign trail, a lot of what he said on the campaign trail, he's at least tried to address during his administration. And one of those things that he talked about was this idea of birthright citizenship. And so for our audience, just a little precursor, birthright citizenship would be individuals that are born here in the U.S. automatically becoming citizens. We can best gauge around 250 to 300,000 children are born every year here in the U.S. by two unauthorized immigrant parents. And so because they're born on U.S. soil, it allows them, it grants them the opportunity to become citizens of the U.S. There's been some instances where there's even birth tours that I was hearing in California, Kirby, that I'm sure you're aware of, especially being from that area, where you have individuals that are kind of just happen to be over here while they're 9 months pregnant and then just on a little vacation, and they happen to give birth to their child. And so one, we can kind of see that as just it's a feather in our cap that individuals would want to come and live here. But two, how do we get a better handle on it? And so Kirby, help us better understand this particular issue, because we know Lindsey Graham is now planned on being able to offer up Senate legislation. President Trump said he wanted to do it through an executive order on Sunday night. What are we thinking about right now?
First of all, let's just set aside this idea that Trump brought this up during the campaign, because I've looked at the actual interview there in Axios, and they said something about, you brought this up, and he said, well, you're right, but I thought I was the only one that knew about this. So he may have planned to announce this during the election, but it was because they brought it up. So that sets aside a lot of, quote, fake news that says he's doing this right now because of the election. Maybe he is. Maybe he's glad that it came out, but it doesn't seem like he brought it out. But anybody wants to read about that, I really tried to be fair about this, because a number of years ago, there was a very good article that appeared in the University of Texas Law Review, and that came out in 2014, arguing that the 14th Amendment, as we understand it, 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, and 15th Amendment, were really after the Civil War. 13th Amendment actually during the Civil War, but it was an attempt to grant citizenship, obviously, to people who were here not by their own volition. They were slaves. Now, the question then is, later on, what does this idea of jurisdiction of, which is in there, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subjects to the jurisdiction thereof, or are citizens of the United States and the state of which they reside. And so what did that mean? We did have a case that came out in 1884 that raised the question, well, are Indians born of Indian parents citizens? And the Supreme Court actually ruled no. Later on, you have one with Asians, which went the other way. But it's always been a little bit ambiguous, and so I wrote about that years ago and said that's where we are on that case. More recently, in August, I wrote of one because a professor up there at Hillsdale College, Michael Anton, wrote something in the Washington Post about this. But I started it by simply saying this: if you're convinced that we should get rid of birthright citizenship, you need to start with our fellow conservatives, people that sit in this chair, like Kelly Shackelford or James Ho, who we've quoted, all say, no, that's what the 14th Amendment means. Now, you have other individuals, including the president, including, of course, Ann Coulter and people like that, that say, no, it doesn't mean that. And so we are in a situation where I think if you understand the context of trying to overturn Dred Scott, trying to give rights to slaves, then you could see that's what it was intended. But now we've had how many years of history in which we've assumed that is the case. And so that gets to the practical issue we can talk about after the break, and that is, even if you could change birthright citizenship, what do you do with all the people that already were granted? And what procedure would you have in the future? Because obviously individuals that are here or want to be here need to have some way to become citizens, apart from, of course, the naturalization process.
And that's one of the things that's so pivotal for millennials, David, right? Just because these are individuals that very much, like, we know these type of individuals, and like we have the relationships with them just because we're such a diverse generation, right?
Very, very true. Yeah. And it's a very great area of what I'm seeing, because there's so many just different, people coming in, and you have no idea, like, okay, what are their intentions being here, and are they actually serving and being part of the country, being citizens,
Yes, like I think that's going to be a really interesting perspective as we kind of move forward with this. It'll be interesting to see just kind of some of the corollaries, but we got to take a break right now. And so when we come back from the break, we're going to talk a little bit more about the birthright citizenship. We're going to examine the arguments. Is this something that can be done from an executive order? Is this something that requires congressional approval? Is this something that requires a constitutional convention? And so we'll be talking a little bit about that and more right after this.
Very good.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
What does it take for normal people to start slaughtering others? A commentary in the Jerusalem Post with the title The Genocide Mechanism showed how demonization could lead to genocide. The writer talked about a very specific kind of demonization, and the example he used was Rwanda. In 1994, the majority Hutu population was able to massacre some 800,000 Tutsis. The violence was unimaginable. Neighbors slaughtering neighbors, mostly with machetes. The estimates are about 9,000 men, women, and children were slaughtered every day. How does something so awful happen? Well, the answer is demonization. The Hutus were taught that the Tutsis were cockroaches and snakes. Tutsi women were portrayed as cunning seductresses who used beauty and sexual powers to conquer the Hutus. There were also warnings on the radio that the Tutsis were about to attack them, so they needed to attack first to protect themselves. Step 1 was to dehumanize the enemy with all sorts of false statements. Step 2 was to present a clear danger. Then you merely need to convince people that they need to act in their own self-defense. The commentary explains how this type of demonization has been used by Hamas and the Palestinian Authority to describe Jews as loathsome and dangerous animals. Could something like this happen in this country? We would hope not. But you do see some similarities. Look at how the left portrays President Trump, Republican members of Congress, and even conservative speakers on college campus. They are the equivalent of Hitler. They're not worthy of any respect and represent a clear and present danger to various sectors of society. They want to put people in detainment camps and even march them off to gas chambers. This is the reminder that hateful words and demonization can lead to horrific acts against other human beings. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Graceworks Pictures, Indivisible, based on the true story of Army Chaplain Darren Turner and his wife Heather. Rated PG-13. Now playing. IndivisibleMovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable on this Halloween day by Kerby Anderson and David Fraga, and we have been talking about the ending of the birthright citizenship question that was raised out of an interview by Axios with President Trump, signaling that he is open to the idea of an executive order. And as you might be able to expect, much like everything that President Trump says, it has caused a reaction.
You think?
And so there has been much ink that has been spilled over this. And I think one of the interesting perspectives that you bring to the table is that you are a second generation, firstborn
generation here.
Firstborn generation immigrant. And so when you hear this news, help us to think aloud for us when you hear this news. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely always concerns when people start talking about just, changing of amendments, changing of laws or anything like that. But for me, my family story goes back took them 10 years to get their citizenship. And my parents wanted to do it right, of course. And for me, my brother and my sister were born during that process. I was born after they got their citizenship. But it's been such a blessing. And I mean, my parents, they brought in value. They both had MBAs, coming in with skilled labor, coming in with careers in mind and stuff. So I can't relate too much to the people who are coming in illegally or just trying to get the citizenship. But what I can relate to is that we are trying to do the right thing, going through the system correctly, even though it can be flawed.
I think that's one of the things I think a lot of individuals would throw up their hands and say that the system is there's kind of a backlog at the system right now. And I think that's probably one of the things that I'm most concerned about, Kerby, is that we want to tell people to get to the back, to get in line, to be able to enter an orderly process. But right now, the line resembles nothing like a line right now. And so it just is very difficult right now when we think about the immigration issue.
It is sad to say that since I've been doing this broadcast for more than 30 years, that decades ago I was saying that the problem we have with our issue of immigration is that illegal immigration sometimes is fairly easy. People overstaying their visa, crossing the line. Not saying that walking through the Sonoran Desert is easy, but the bottom line is somewhat easier. And that legal immigration is very, very difficult. And we have, every time we've opened up the phone, had people talking about the years that they've gone through. They're from Germany, they're from Canada, they're from South Africa, they're wherever it might be, they're from India, and just how long it took to, as David points out, do it the right way. Mm-hmm. And so when that backlog is so huge, and when we frankly need so many individuals, we have more jobs right now than we have people to fill those jobs. Mm-hmm. But the people we want to fill those jobs, in many cases, are the people waiting in line, the ones that have those kinds of degrees. You know, we have lots of jobs opening right now in the biotech industry, in the computer industry, and those are not going to be filled, candidly, by the people in the caravan heading north, but they are going to be filled by some of the people who've been waiting years to come to this country and would instantaneously step into that job and make a difference.
Yeah, and so help us to understand, Kerby. I think this would be because there's multiple ways in which this executive order, if it's going to be constitutional, it's going to require changing the Constitution. What are some of our options here that we have right now? Because it seems as though President Trump wants to just being very blunt, with an executive order, I would imagine that just continues to enlarge the executive branch of the government, with the president being able to issue this type of EU. Yeah.
Well, again, that's part of our problem. We have a situation right now where as I've said, we have other Republicans, how about Paul Ryan, for example, and others say, wait a minute, we wouldn't allow President Obama to get his pen in his phone. We can't allow either President in situation right now doing the same thing. So because Donald Trump wants to enact that, doesn't mean that it would actually be official or constitutional with an executive order. Let's face it, even if he did come up with an executive order, there are people right now writing the preliminary injunction that they would file the moment it was filed. So it's going to go through the courts. And the reality is, does it require a constitutional amendment? I'm not one that is convinced that it would, because it's all on what the interpretation is of the 14th Amendment. And sometimes we do have to make some allowances for changes. Yes, the 14th Amendment was just used to deal with slaves, and it wasn't really thinking about immigration at that time. But at the same time, some of our laws were written, for example, interstate commerce, long before we had automobiles and planes. So sometimes you have to update it, but still with an originalist perspective, which we hold to around this table. So I think the executive order wouldn't be enough. I think maybe a congressional vote might be, but is there any possibility right now that this Congress would actually enact it? And more importantly, if you need a constitutional amendment, 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, there's not a chance that would happen. And then even if it was challenged in the courts, do we have 5 justices on the Supreme Court right now?
I think that's it.
I just don't see any of this happening.
Because at the end of the day, I think it's going to be challenged no matter what. And so we're going to see an appeal to the judicial component.
Right.
And it's hard for me to fathom
I just can't see it.
Supreme Court wanting to uphold.
Yeah.
And so I would imagine that this type of legislation that would come to try to change what's already been put into place and what's already we're kind of living in for the past years. I can't imagine the Supreme Court changing that.
The only thing I can come up with is if there was some moderation on Donald Trump. I know that's a contradiction of terms, but if there was, in which he put out an executive order saying that we would routinely assume that children born here are indeed citizens, but there would be an appeal process where in some cases, let me think of some really bizarre ones. You have drug pins that get their wife pregnant, come to this country and use the child there. A terrorist that is maybe using that to have a child as citizenship so they can do, if you will, chain migration, that there would be some times where you could appeal that. I think most Americans would say, okay, that seems fair, because there are some times, they're very rare, but there are some times when we have people here where we really do want to deport them. We do not want to keep them in this country. And if this was being used as a mechanism to gain citizenship and chain migration for those individuals, we would maybe want to be able to have some way to appeal that.
Yeah.
So that's a possibility.
And David, it just help us give that millennial perspective, because I know it from my millennial friends, I think one of the things that just becomes so real for them is this isn't just a policy issue. This is their friends that they're talking about.
Right.
These are individuals that they've gone to college with, and they're dreamers. These are individuals that they know their family, they know their friends, but and so this becomes very personal for them. It's not just a political issue. So if there was going to be anything done from the political side, it would have to require a pretty significant load to try to get millennials on board with this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it also, this scenario kind of makes me think back a few months ago, maybe, when the government was stopping buses and holding children, and people were trying to make a big deal of that and coming over. And I know of a lot of people who will overstay their visas and then go back and then come back and get work visas and this and that, or student visas, right? But honestly, like, it's a very gray area.
Yeah.
Like we were mentioning before, and I'm glad we're discussing this because this is something that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, because I know from a Christian perspective, I mean, you're holding two weights, right? You're holding the weight of wanting to heed the rule of the law, wanting to honor the authorities, 1 Peter 2, Romans 13. But then they're also, I mean, you would have to read with your eyes closed the biblical narrative to not see compassion to the stranger and the foreigner. But I think sometimes, correct me if I'm wrong, sometimes we have a limited view of compassion, where compassion requires us to tear down the walls and to allow everybody in, or to allow everybody to stay, which is, I think that's a wrong understanding of compassion.
Right. And it's also like the biblical verse that talks about opening your home, opening your home up. And so what does that look like, especially in the Bible Belt, right? Yeah. And then, okay, but how do we have boundaries? How can we say no and not say yes to everything? And I feel like in my generation, millennial generation, we say yes to too many things. We don't know how to say no. And it goes back to like what we talked about before, identity stuff.
Yeah. So I think it's going to be very interesting. I'm especially interested here in the next little segment we're going to talk about. We'll continue talking about this because at the end of the day, I think Kerby brought up a really great point, is that there are more job openings than we have people to fill the jobs right now. And that's not simply I'm operating at a loss right now. That's I'm leaving money on the table kind of thing. And especially when we're coming into this kind of very precarious situation where the markets, we're beginning to see the tremors of the markets not doing too well right now. I think that's something for us to be cognizant of as we're moving forward with this. Or we now again, I want to heed the rule of law, but I also want us to be aware that there are many individuals. There's farming industries, there's tech industries, there's a multitude of industries right now that are in desperate need of these individuals, because again, we're a nation of immigrants, and these and immigrants, because we all are one, have been able to contribute in some form or fashion that's been to the benefit of our country. And so we'll continue talking about this ending birthright citizenship and just the immigration issue. But we got to take a break right now. But we'd love to hear from you. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, 800-351-1212. What do you think about President Donald Trump wanting to end birthright citizenship? We'd love to hear from you. Or you can jump on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. That live video box right there, just right underneath that live video box, put your question or comment, and what you share online, we'll try to get to over air as well. So when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about ending birthright citizenship. What is the best way to do it? Is this a good thing to do at this particular juncture? What is the Christian perspective on this? We will talk about that, as well as answer some of your phone calls right after this.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
So there's this guy named Jordan. He's a healthy guy. He's a dad of 6, and he works as a guide in Alaska. And he goes to the doctor, true story. He goes to the doctor, and he's diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. And here's the thing. He had switched earlier from medical insurance to Medishare, where Christians share each other's medical bills. So the question for Jordan and his wife Jenny was, is this actually going to work?
Our medical bills exceeded $160,000. Medishare members shared all our bills.
And it was about more than just the money, too. This is a real community.
Medishare is a family, a group of people that stick with you through the hardest times of your life. I just don't know how I could have done it without Medishare.
It's so worth looking into. There's a reason this is growing so fast. So if you want to find out more, here is a number for you. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, and joined at the Millennial Roundtable by David Fraga and Kerby Anderson. And we have been talking about President Trump and his, I guess, entertaining the idea of ending birthright citizenship, the idea that individuals, that as long as they are born here within the country, that they automatically become citizens. I think that's been pretty much the established precedent for quite a while, and now we're beginning to see some of the ripple effects. The closest numbers I could find was out of Pew right now that indicated around 275,000 babies are born every year due to this. I think some individuals would say it's a pejorative term to call them anchor babies, but I guess that's what they're kind of accurately known as. Kerby, what were you thinking?
I was just going to give you some numbers, too, because at the peak, and that's back before we had the Great Recession, 370,000 in 1 year. So anywhere from 1/3 to now about 100,000. And a lot of the issue of anchor babies or birthright citizenship or whatever you want to call them, some people see those as pejorative terms. I'm not using that in that way, has diminished in part because of the Great Recession. But now we have an upturned economy, and you might see more and more people coming and having children here. So,
and so
we'll
this
see.
All centers around the 14th Amendment. And so this is the first time I'll go ahead and read it. So the 14th Amendment states, all persons born or naturalized in the United States, and here's the key point, quote, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Again, this idea of subject to the jurisdiction thereof is kind of the point of speculation right now. Essentially, the question comes down to this. Does the subject to the jurisdiction thereof mean simply subject to American laws and courts, or does it mean owing absolute allegiance to the U.S.? And so I think that's really the kind of the key question that individuals are finding themselves with, because one might be able to argue, especially for those that are for ending birthright citizenship, that these are not individuals that are showing their complete allegiance, that they simply just came here in order to get citizenship and then and in order to bring the family along with it. And then there's others that would say, well, they're just subject, just like you and I, outside of diplomats, and then the American Indians are subject to the laws and courts when you're here. When I come in Dallas area, when I drive down 75, I'm subject to the speed limit of 75, regardless of what state
your
I'm from
nationality
or
is.
nationality.
That's right.
So that's the argument that would just say, well, if they're born here in the U.S., they can stay here in the U.S. So we'd love to hear from you, your perspective on that. So you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212, or facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And we're going to go ahead and jump online right now. We've got a phone call out of South Carolina right now. We've got Brian in South Carolina. Brian, you there?
Yes, I'm here waiting for you.
Hey, Brian, which point of view?
I'm calling about birthright citizenship, about the interpretation of the clause in the Constitution, which is already in the Constitution, subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And the 1860s, Representative Jacobs, who you can look up, and his counterpart in the Senate stated that what subject to the jurisdiction thereof means, and this is from the authors of the bill, it means subject to the jurisdiction of no other principality or power. And subject to the jurisdiction did not mean subject to the laws of the country, that it was subject to being a citizen of another country. So if a person was not a citizen of another country, then that was subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. However, people who were born in the country and were subject to the jurisdiction of another country would not be included in this. In other words, if they were citizens of another country, say a citizen of Mexico, by virtue of being born to a Mexican on U.S. soil, then that person would not be subject to the jurisdiction thereof. That is the original intent of the 14th Amendment by the authors of the amendment, stated plainly in congressional journals.
Yeah. Good. Brian, let me add to your argument, because I used this a couple of years ago when I wrote about that, because indeed those were the intent of the authors. And if somebody says, well, I'm not sure about that, It turns out that we had a Civil Rights Act of 1866. And in that particular, and that was actually used as the framing for the 14th Amendment, well, the Civil Rights Act of 1866 actually included not subject to any foreign power. So it made it very clear that it was this idea of jurisdiction, not subject to any other power, and was not intended to grant citizenship to anyone with so-called divided allegiance. So you can make the case, I think, legally in the 19th century. But, of course, we've got all this history now of individuals that are now, once they're born here, are considered citizens. And that's a big practical question that a Donald Trump will have to resolve, right?
And just to completely go on a tangential, in the 1860s, that Civil Rights Act that was passed, there was an individual named Charles Sumner that was a part of that.
Yes,
and
that's
so
right.
let's hopefully there's no caning that becomes as a result of this debate.
Let's explain to that, because they caned him to the point where they almost killed him. That is absolutely right.
So also known as the Brooks-Sumner affair. Brooks,
that's a little point of history, which I wish more of our listeners knew. But anyway, that's something.
And so whenever individuals, and this is a good point for individuals to be able to make. So you probably have friends that say something along the lines of, "It's never been this crazy here in the U.S."
Oh, yes, it is.
Quite literally, Representative Brooks did not like what Senator Sumner said during the 1840s during a debate. And what does he do? Representative Brooks goes over to Sumner, literally almost beats him to death because Senator Sumner is trapped underneath his desk. He eventually comes back, and because of him coming back, spent some time in France, comes back from France, and now as a chief proponent and really does move forward this Civil Rights Act of the 1865, 1867. So just a really good
Isn't that
point
hilarious?
Yeah. So my thoughts are, and I want to ask you guys about dual citizenship. Because I actually have dual citizenship, and because my parents are from Mexico.
Okay.
And actually, my grandfather was born in Chicago.
Okay.
So, but they moved right after he was born to Mexico. And they lived there all their lives, and then they moved back here.
Okay.
So I want to ask you guys about your thoughts on that.
So I'll go ahead and say, I'm a dual citizen of Tennessee and Texas, and so I've got that, and I also know that a house divided will not stand, and so I'm just a crumpling mess right now, knowing that the Titans are coming in. That's all I can add to the conversation.
Cowboys and Titans. We've got to ask him where he's going to vote on. Okay, the bottom line is, because your parents are from Mexico or Canada or other places, there are 33 nations in the world that have birthright citizenship. Almost all of them are in the Western Hemisphere. You might say, why is that? Colonialism. Because when the colonial powers were here, they wanted to do all they could to get as many white faces over here to overpopulate the Indian race. So first of all, that whole idea of dual citizenship goes all the way back to something which we reject today, rightly so. But nevertheless, that's why, let's take another example. I believe there's a Senate race right now, and if you might remember, when he was running for the presidency, an individual who was a U.S. Senator from Texas who was born in Canada by the name of Ted Cruz had a dual citizenship, both Canadian and American. Why American? Because he had an American parent or parents, depending on how you want to count that. And he also was born in Canada. You have dual citizenship as well. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we have birthright citizenship in many of these countries here in the Western Hemisphere. But the reason we have birthright citizenship has to do with colonialism of all things.
And that's
Isn't that
not
interesting?
necessarily the most positive thing to be able to bring back.
No, not necessarily.
Yeah, and so we're going to have to take a break right now, but when we come back from the break, we'll continue talking about birthright citizenship. I think one of the strongest, at least what I would contend, is one of the strongest arguments for birthright citizenship would kind of point to the example of what's happening in Europe right now. When you have these immigrants that are born that are second-class citizens, it ends up turning into a type of caste system, which is probably I would consider the strongest critique right now of being able to eradicate this birthright citizenship. We'll expand some of those thoughts a little bit more. We won't talk about individuals getting caned anymore. We'll kind of move on from Senator Sumner and the beating, but we will be taking some of your phone calls, which hopefully won't be metaphorical beatings. No, I'm just kidding. So we'd love to hear your comments on what's happening relative to birthright citizenship right now. Do you think it's a positive? Do you think it's a negative? I would love to hear from you. So you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And for those of you in Facebook land right now, facebook.com/pointofviewradio, you can leave a question or comment underneath the live video feed. And when you leave your question or comment online, we'll try to share that over air as well. But when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about this idea of the second-class citizen that is pretty pervasive right now over in Europe because of kind of the situation like what Kerby was talking about, relative to just the kind of feeling is that they weren't born in their home country and now they really have no citizenship and they aren't entailed to the privileges they're in of that particular country. And so we'll be talking about that and a little bit more, as well as taking some of your questions and comments. But we've got to take a break right now. But when we come back, more Point of View right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The U.S. Department of Justice recently announced that it will update the U.S. Attorney's Manual, creating a new section giving special attention to religious liberty. Updates to such a manual are sometimes viewed as routine, but they tend to reflect the values and priorities of the Department of Justice and function as a sort of roadmap for the department's coming years. The updates announced in the new manual requires the nation's U.S. attorneys to not only identify a dedicated point of contact on litigation having to do with religious liberty, but also requires coordination of any such litigation directly with the central office in Washington, D.C. In other words, Attorney General Sessions is announcing that his office will be very hands-on in lawsuits involving our first freedom. When the Department of Justice announced the updated U.S. Attorney's Manual, then Associate Attorney General Rachel Brand explained, quote, "Religious liberty is an inalienable right protected by the Constitution, and defending it is one of the most important things we do at the Department of Justice." Clearly, the days of abandoning protections in the law for religious liberty, including bipartisan laws like the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, may be a thing of the past. The critical leadership of the Attorney General and his staff to protect religious liberty for all Americans will do much to strengthen all of our core freedoms. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined by Kerby Anderson and David Fraga. I just like to put Kerby on the spot right as soon as we're about to go on air.
I do that to Kelly Shackelford when he's sitting here. His head explodes sometimes as we're coming back from a break because I've said something that he didn't want to hear.
So good, so good. Well, we are so grateful that you decided to join us. We've been talking about President Trump and his desire to end birthright citizenship, entertaining the idea of doing that through executive order. Senator Graham came in yesterday and said that he would be, he tweeted out that he plans to propose legislation that is quintessential millennial move of tweeting out your plans to do something. But nevertheless,
in a string of tweets, it says there were multiple tweets.
Oh, yeah, that's
multiples.
The quintessential millennial move. Yeah. Speaking as a millennial, and so we have been talking a little bit about birthright citizenship. What's the positive? What's the negative? One of the things that I highlighted in the daily briefing this morning is what individual over Dan McLaughlin over at National Review writes that I think is a pretty persuasive point to be made. And he says, quote, any effort to uproot birthright citizenship, even for children of illegal aliens, would bring up closer to the European problem of a two-tiered caste of citizens and permanently alienated aliens. And it's this sense that they're literally individuals that have no home. There's no citizen if they were born here and say they were not born in France or not born in China, so they're not Chinese citizens, they're not American citizens, and so what are they? They loom in the shadow. And what we've already seen because of what we're experiencing right now with illegal immigration is that they're not a negative drag on it, but it does produce problems. We don't know who's actually here right now. So I think that's a pretty significant point to be made as well. We're going to be taking some of your phone calls too, so you can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And we're going to jump on over let's go to Larry right now. Larry in Indiana right now. Larry, you there?
Yes, I am. Thanks for taking my call.
Hey, Larry.
Well, my point of view, you stated a number of things here, but I'll state them all real quick. I don't believe that President Trump is outside of his authority to do this, because in fact he'd be enforcing the rule of law under the Constitution. That the system was always as it was before, up through the 50s and into the 60s, and somehow it morphed in the 60s over to what it is now, as far as granting citizenship upon birth. That somehow nobody's really been able to define how it did it, but it happened during the 60s. You talked about the, per 100,000 illegal minors in this country. A recent study it was done. It was $37,000 a year per minor. So you're talking $3.7 billion a year to support illegal minors. There were 100 ISIS members caught in Honduras recently, and these individuals coming out of Honduras. 4. A lot of these individuals don't qualify for refugee status here because under our laws, under I think international law, they must apply for refugee status in the first country they arrive in after leaving their home country, which would be not out of Honduras.
Yeah.
It would be other than Mexico, actually, wouldn't it? Because they have to go through another country anyway.
Yeah, Guatemala, Mexico, something like that. That's true. Very true.
Right. Yeah. And we're looking at the unemployment rate here. Yes, we have more jobs than we have people on the official unemployment rate. That's not counting those people that are underemployed and that have fallen off the rolls.
Yeah, you're talking to millennial, that's for sure. Underemployed. I think our number of underemployed is anywhere north of 30% right now. I know the unemployment rate is under 4%, but we're not doing too well right now. We've got individuals that are working certain jobs with I guess you would say college degree, and so we're very much overeducated right now. I think that's a great point.
And we're looking at national defense. We're looking at those possible ISIS members. We're looking at confirmed members of the MS-13 gang that are down there as well.
Yeah,
that are part of that quote caravan. So we're looking at a national defense situation here as well.
Yeah,
and a country that does not have enforceable borders is not a country.
Yeah.
It's a landmass.
Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting things, Larry, that you bring up is like to a certain degree that we need to enforce our borders. Not to a certain degree, just full stop. We need to enforce our borders. Period.
Right, and then the solution, I believe the solution for those individuals that are here already is that they can go ahead and apply for legal resident status and then pursue their naturalization. We don't need a redo of the Reagan years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it will be interesting just because, I mean, the numbers are staggering, the number of individuals that are here right now. It's there was one study that was put out by MIT and Yale that indicated that it's upwards of 22 million people that are here.
I think that's probably a more accurate number, yeah.
And that's unbelievable, Kerby, that we have so many individuals that are here. And I think one of the things that I need to send just to be able to distinguish, and Larry, thank you so much for calling, is that I guess there's a perception that immigrants and then undocumented immigrants are just a drain on the resources. And I think that's an important point that we need to rectify right now, Kerby, is that, and again, this is not me advocating for amnesty right now. This is me just stating reality. And I think it's important for us to understand that undocumented immigrants contribute around $11.6 billion to the economy annually. If forecasts hold, they'll contribute approximately $80,000 more in taxes than government services used over their lifetime. And from a workforce standpoint, undocumented workers contribute approximately 3% of private sector gross domestic product, or about $5 trillion over a decade. States that stand to lose quite a bit from this would be California as well as Texas as well. We would lose quite a bit if we quote-unquote deported everyone back, just because, again, we would leave quote-unquote money on the proverbial table right now. And so I think that's an important point. But then it just brings us to a pretty significant point, David, because as you know, I completely forgot, David, that you're in the housing. You're building houses, right? Like that's a part of, and you're having trouble right now trying to find individuals, right?
Yeah, specifically skilled labor, you know, electricians, people who, I mean, I'm seeing plumbers, they're just shooting their prices up, honestly. I mean, just because they can. They need
capitalism, everybody. Capitalism, isn't it great?
Man, there's just too many of them.
Yeah.
Or not enough of them, too many of us trying to use them. Right?
Yeah.
That's the other day we were talking to somebody and they were saying that he brought this plumber over in Colorado to work there, and he charged an outrageous amount. And the guy said, "Look, I'm a doctor. I don't get that much." And the plumber said, "I used to be a doctor. I'm a plumber now because I'm making more money." That tells you everything about the fact that a lot of people don't like those dirty jobs. Oh, yeah. And if you have skills at any level that is a need right now, that's an opportunity for you.
It's so great. That is so great. So it reminds me of the Hayek quote: "If you put freedom before if you put equality before freedom, you'll get neither. But if you put freedom before equality, you'll get both." And so we've got to take a break right now. But when we come back from the break, we'll continue talking a little bit about this. We'll also be taking some of your phone calls. My goodness, you all have some contributions that you would like to make and some point of views that you would like to have heard about the ending birthright citizenship, kind of spawned from what happened out of President Trump and the news that broke over Axios earlier this week on Monday, that he was putting forward or entertaining the idea of an executive order to end birthright citizenship, to end, and I don't mean this in a pejorative term, in the anchor baby debacle. And so we would love to continue to hear from you on that. We know Lindsey Graham has spoken out. He's tweeted in a series of tweets, has indicated that he is going to draft legislation to support this. And we'd love to hear from you. What are your thoughts? Do you think this is a good idea? Do you think this is a bad idea? You can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And then also on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. You leave a question or comment online, and we'll get to it over air as well. David, it's so good to have you here, man. Yeah. Thanks so much for coming.
Absolutely.
Very cool. And then, Kerby, you got to put up with me for another hour.
Oh, we got more to talk about. We got all sorts of callers here.
Yeah, we got all sorts of callers.
We got to hear what they had to say.
I can't wait. And so you be sure to stick around, but we've got to take a first break. But when we come back, more from Point of View.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
So there's this guy named Jordan. He's a healthy guy. He's a dad of 6, and he works as a guide in Alaska. And he goes to the doctor, true story, he goes to the doctor, and he's diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. And here's the thing. He had switched earlier from medical insurance to Medishare, where Christians share each other's medical bills. So the question for Jordan and his wife, Jenny, was, is this actually going to work?
Our medical bills exceeded $160,000. Medishare members shared all our bills.
And it was about more than just the money, too. This is a real community.
Medishare is a family, a group of people that stick with you through the hardest times of your life. I just don't know how I could have done it without Medishare.
It's so worth looking into. There's a reason this is growing so fast. So if you want to find out more, here is a number for you. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts. And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, on this Wednesday, October 31st, 2018 day. Happy Halloween, and especially a happy Halloween if you have been listening for the past 3 hours. That's quite a feat.
That is. You get some free candy or something. I don't know.
That is less treat, more
candy
of a
corn,
trick.
something.
Yeah.
What's your favorite Halloween candy?
No, that's where I was going to go with that. I'm probably peanut butter cups. I think I'm a peanut butter cup guy. I think one of the bummer things here in Texas, and I don't know if you experienced this or not, was that it's still
candy
pretty
popcorn.
warm. It's still pretty warm here. So your peanut butter cups could be melted by the time you get through.
I've had a few of those.
Yeah. I think one of the things I put in the daily briefing that Kerby was at least honest about it, is that 84% of parents admit to stealing their kids' candy on Halloween, and so I'm glad he wasn't part of the 16% that lied and said that they didn't steal their kids' candy. No, that's why I have trust issues with Joe and Michelle Pitts, but that's beside the point.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you just don't know. Yeah. And again, my argument is we drug them to each one of these houses. We gave them the bags and gave out, and in fact, that's one of the other things you point out. Most parents admit to buying more candy than they think they're going to hand out.
So true.
Which does not happen in our household. My wife is always a little bit on the stingy side here, and pretty soon the lights are going off because we are out. And there's none to be eaten.
That's great. That's great. Well, we're so excited that you decided to join us today on Point of View, and we have been talking a little bit about birthright citizenship. President Trump announced earlier this week his intentions to be able to potentially write an executive order that would end birthright citizenship, obviously causing quite the reactions. Senator Lindsey Graham echoed that and supported that, but did so by saying that he was going to plan to write legislation to end birthright citizenship. So one side wants to go through the executive branch, the other side wants to go through the legislative branch, and then you've got many individuals that are saying there's no way it's going to get passed out of the judicial branch, that the Supreme Court just is not made up to be able to do something like that. And we have been taking some of your phone calls, your reactions to what's happened relative to birthright citizenship. Do you think it's a good thing that we should end it? Do you think it's a bad thing that we should end it? Do you think it's just a thing that we probably need to talk about now, just relative to some of the numbers that Kerby was sharing earlier? I mean, on the low end is what I gave in 2014. The number was around 275,000. Kerby, on the high end,
370,000.
So that's quite a bit of individuals.
Third of a million.
That's quite a bit of individuals that are going to be born here. So we'd love to hear from you. You can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And we'll take a phone call to start us off here on this first hour. So let's jump on over. We'll go to Jim in Georgia right now. Jim, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Jim, what's your point of view?
Well, two things. One, I was commenting on the economic data that you presented with respect to the amount undocumented workers contribute to the economy.
Yeah.
If they're undocumented, where do you come about that data? And my next point, or my comment about anchor babies is, frankly, I think that that's long overdue, and I don't know if your numbers referred to just the babies being born, but it's never just the baby. If they're anchor babies, then it's probably a mother and a father and other children that come in. So it's a problem that as harsh as it may sound, it needs to be corrected.
Yep. I completely agree. So it's funny that you mentioned that, Jim, because that was one of the things that Kerby and I were talking about actually during the break. Is the extent that one, there's wrongs on both sides. One, sometimes I think we can be wrong and think that they're not contributing anything, which is kind of what some of the research that I was pulling from was the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, which was really pulling from the Migration Institute policy that was using kind of one, survey data that they had gathered, but then also two, census data that they had gathered as well, from not only from companies but also from individuals, to be able to get the numbers that I was pointing to, the idea that undocumented immigrants contribute $11.6 billion to the economy annually. States that if you deported everyone, that would stand to lose quite a bit, was $5 trillion over a decade. In Texas specifically, there'd be a 4% drop in California and private sector output. So that was kind of where some of the research I was kind of alluding to that you pointed out. But then also, Kerby, I think one of the things that you brought up that was really important is they're not able to benefit as well from the system as well. They're just paying into it. They're not getting anything from it right now.
And again, we've talked about this with Babe Buchanan, and who's Pat Buchanan's sister, and she really educated us years ago about the fact that, okay, if you're using a phony Social Security card so that you actually are able to work, you're putting it into an account, but you're never going to be drawing it out. Yeah. So there's the first issue. The other issue, and I think Jim asked a good question, how do we know those numbers? The problem at start is, do we have 11 million, excuse me, I keep getting the wrong numbers, 11 million or 22 million people? Yep. That changes the factors dramatically. Then did you count everything from, food stamps and WIC and those which sometimes are obtained illegally? Yeah. So it's really hard to get a number, because the number, first of all, that you want to start with, you don't know what that number is. Mm-hmm. And then the illegality and the black market kind of things that have to take place if you're here under the radar are really hard to track. So, you could throw darts at a board and probably come up with numbers that are just as accurate probably as any ones that people are trying to come up with. Yeah. That's the sad reality. And that's why we got to get people out of the shadows. We need to figure out who is here, provide those individuals that have tried to do this legally with a path to citizenship, efficiently change the immigration policies that have been crafted during the 19th century, and secure the border and all the other aspects of things that haven't been taking place.
Yeah, I think that's one right on. Jim, thank you so much for your phone call. We appreciate it.
Thank you for taking it.
Yeah. Kerby, I think you bring up a great point, is that we're just trying to measure the shadow, and it's really hard to be able to measure that.
If you don't even know how many are here, what no, you can come up with any number, because we just don't know.
Yeah, it really is. But I think there's a general sense that I think there's certain things that we can just know. One, we know that illegal immigrants contribute to this economy right now.
Sure.
If you were to take away, I think you can bring in...
Drive down a neighborhood, watch them putting on a roof, watch them doing gardening, whatever. A lot of those people, frankly, are not here legally.
Yeah, and so we know that they are contributing greatly to a wide variety of areas. And so I would say that, one, we've got to recognize that, but two, we've got to recognize that when individuals and when the officials heed the law, prosperity abounds. That is clear from the social science. And so what we want to do is to be able to set up laws, and not only to be able to set up those laws, but also to be able to enforce those laws as well. But then from a Christian perspective, one of the things that I continually want to go back to is, what does it look like to be compassionate? I think we've been sold a false bill of goods when we have to choose between building up higher walls and between tearing down every wall. That this isn't a false dichotomy, that compassion can look differently. I think one of the ways that I alluded to it in the daily briefing the other day, that compassion looked like drawing in the sand with Jesus in John 8. It looked like a gourd plant in Jonah 4. Compassion typically looks a little differently. And so what does compassion look like? Is it implementing an ambassador in Mexico right now, that just because there's no ambassador? I think one of the things, did you have something that you want to? Oh, yeah. Or you're just trying to tell me that we're running out of time right now. And then Andrew is trying to play music to put me out. I feel like I'm on the Emmys right now. You're trying to get me to close out right now. But nevertheless, we'll be back right after this, and I'll continue ranting.
I'm sorry. I just tried to...
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
What does it take for normal people to start slaughtering others? A commentary in the Jerusalem Post with the title The Genocide Mechanism showed how demonization could lead to genocide. The writer talked about a very specific kind of demonization, and the example he used was Rwanda. In 1994, the majority Hutu population was able to massacre some 800,000 Tutsis. The violence was unimaginable. Neighbors slaughtering neighbors, mostly with machetes. The estimates are about 9,000 men, women, and children were slaughtered every day. How does something so awful happen? Well, the answer is demonization. The Hutus were taught that the Tutsis were cockroaches and snakes. Tutsi women were portrayed as cunning seductresses who used beauty and sexual powers to conquer the Hutus. There were also warnings on the radio that the Tutsis were about to attack them, so they needed to attack first to protect themselves. Step 1 was to dehumanize the enemy with all sorts of false statements. Step 2 was to present a clear danger. Then you merely need to convince people that they need to act in their own self-defense. The commentary explains how this type of demonization has been used by Hamas and the Palestinian Authority to describe Jews as loathsome and dangerous animals. Could something like this happen in this country? We would hope not. But you do see some similarities. Look at how the left portrays President Trump, Republican members of Congress, and even conservative speakers on college campus. They are the equivalent of Hitler. They're not worthy of any respect and represent a clear and present danger to various sectors of society. They want to put people in detainment camps and even march them off to gas chambers. This is the reminder that hateful words and demonization can lead to horrific acts against other human beings. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Graceworks Pictures, Indivisible, based on the true story of Army Chaplain Darren Turner and his wife Heather. Rated PG-13. Now playing. IndivisibleMovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, and I'm joined by Kerby Anderson here on the Millennial Roundtable for Point of View. We have been talking about ending birthright citizenship, and all spinning from what President Trump offered up on Axios on the HBO channel earlier this week about wanting to end birthright citizenship. And I was speaking right beforehand, before Andrew decided to start emming me out. I'm going to go ahead and say, playing the music really loudly, telling me I got to get off the air. I think one of the things, Kerby, one of the things that we feel as Christians is the significance of, one, wanting to heed the rule of the law, but also, two, wanting to heed the biblical rule of the law, which is to be able to show compassion. And I think you bring this up in your book you've got.
Yes, and again, we make this available for others, but of course, if you're already a donor, you receive this in the mail. And let's take maybe two passages, one in the Old Testament, one in the New Testament. I love Exodus 22, where it says, "Do not mistreat or oppress a foreigner, for you were foreigners in Egypt." Mm-hmm. And I think it's a great principle. We've got lots of verses from Deuteronomy, but even in the New Testament, you have in Hebrews 13 that we are not to neglect to show hospitality to the strangers. Now, again, let's recognize that a lot of those admonitions, especially in the New Testament, are for us as Christians. So just a few minutes ago, our producer, Steve, was talking about the fact that we really need to make a distinction between government, which bears the sword, and that's the rule of law, and then Christians and the church and nonprofit organizations and those little platoons you and I talk about that provide the compassion. But at the same time, we should also expect that government laws have compassion. And so if we meet somebody at the border, we want to treat them with compassion, even if we deport them. So I think there are two principles here. We have to have our biblical convictions and our belief in rule of law, but also our biblical compassion and our concern for individuals. And in some respects, people that read this say, well, you really
give us two contrary point of views. No, they're the same point of view. They're both equally true at the same time.
Yeah, it's not the false dichotomy that we have to choose one over the other, because I think, again, this is where we feel our strangerness and our alienness as Christians in a very distant land. It's just the reality of, I know I need to be compassionate, and I know I need to heed the rule of law. And so what does that look like? It looks like nothing the political solutions is offering right now, but it is parts of what each political solution is offering right now. So nevertheless, let's go to the phone lines right now. Let's go to Alberta. Alberta, is that you?
Yes.
Hey, Alberta, what's your point of view?
Yes, this is not about the immigration issue. It's about the viewpoint that Mr. Anderson made really just a few minutes ago for the second time. But anyway, the reason why I'm calling is because I think I want to say first off that I am a registered independent voter. I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican, and I vote based on the candidate, not on the party. And I get concerned when I feel like for some of the Christian programs that are on the air, on TV as well as on the radio, there doesn't seem to be a distinction as far as advocating the truth as opposed to supporting the Republican Party. And I think that does a disservice to the body of Christ because, for instance, in the viewpoint that he did, he gave an excellent description of what happened to the people that were slaughtered in Africa. But when he gave the examples in this country, he only gave examples of Democrats saying inappropriate things. I totally agree with him that people should not be demonizing other people, whether it's Democrat or Republican. But I think we need to speak the truth in love. And the other thing is, like, for a Christian program, I think it does a tremendous disservice to the body of Christ and to the cause of Christ when you take up the mantle and it's almost as if there's a cross-the-board endorsement of everything that's being done. And I want to say I'm not a regular listener. Normally, I don't get a chance to listen to your program unless I just happen to be in my car. But I have heard some other things that seem to be handled in a more even-handed manner. But my concern is that there's a disservice being done to the cause of Christ when you're wholeheartedly supporting one party and you don't call out the other party. Now, I'm going to give an example. There is a candidate for Congress here in Louisiana, and he starts his ad out by saying he's a Christian and that every decision he makes is guided by his faith in Christ. And then he goes on to describe his past service and everything, which is good. And at the end he says, and I supported Donald Trump from the beginning, I'm going to continue to support him. When you give a blanket endorsement like that, and you know that there are some issues, serious issues that this person has, that's where I think the cause to the body of Christ comes in. Mm-hmm. Because it seems like you're not dealing with an even hand for the truth. And that's what God calls us to, not to really be the cheerleader for a certain party, but to be a cheerleader for the truth. So that's basically my concern, because I really struggle with this, and it's like when I hear it so many times about different ministries pretty much doing the same thing. And I want to say, too, I don't think there's anyone who does everything right and who does everything wrong. But when they do things right, like when our president does things that are right, support him. But when he does things that are obviously wrong, we need to call him out on it and not just remain silent, because it gives, to me, it's almost like silence means consent.
So you don't think I do everything right, Alberta?
I don't think so. I don't think any of us do. But I just that's my concern, because, like I said, I feel like there needs to be more of an objective.
Completely agree. Especially as Christians, we're better issue people than we are party people. We are the champion. We are individuals that champion issues, and when we get too aligned too closely with parties, sometimes it becomes very detrimental. It reminds me of what Martin Luther King said, that we are not servants of the state; we're the conscience of the state. And so we don't want to be heeding after anyone except our Lord Jesus Christ, and we want to allow the political narrative to be shaped by the biblical narrative instead of allowing the biblical narrative to be shaped by our political narrative. Completely agree with you.
I couldn't say it better. better, and I appreciate that.
Oh, thank you so much. And I think that's one of the values. Kerby and I were we were going back and forth, and think that was something that I mentioned to you on Monday in an email. So what you don't know is, like, yeah, we talk for 3 hours together, and then you all listen in, and sometimes we let you come in with phone calls, but we email back and forth pretty much all the time. And so one of the things that I think is going to be the greatest value, Kerby, moving forward is this idea of being able to call balls and strikes on your own side now. I think we've gotten to a point that we're so polarized that the left and the right aren't listening to one another. And I think this is equally true on both sides. But I think the value is going to be not necessarily if you can persuade others to join your side, but if you're willing to be able to call out individuals on your own side. And it kind of it goes against, to a certain degree, Buckley was, in certain instances, was of this way, of the idea of just saying, well, when one of my fellow conservatives or one of my fellow Democrats errs on that side, I need to be able to call that particular person out, and that's where it gains the value, the quality of the particular movement, I guess you would say.
Well, and I think part of what you and I were going back and forth with is a very good piece by Cal Thomas, who was saying, let's have each side call their side out. And so that is certainly the case. Now, in the commentary, the reason I use that one, anybody who's listened to us before know that we're very critical of some of the tweets by Donald Trump and everything. But the point of genocide is, when you look at the Hutu and the Tutsis and all of that, it's when the name calling becomes so vicious. And, Donald Trump has been called Hitler so many times. Maybe there's some times where Nancy Pelosi's been called Hitler or Hitlerist. I don't know, maybe, but I kind of miss those. And, the shooting, I was using the example of shooting. Those were Republicans being shot at the time. But the other day, we certainly spent some time talking about the bomber who was, a Trump fanboy. I think we have to understand that, again, sometimes Alberta doesn't hear the program every day, but we spend some pretty significant amount of time, so much so that we have people saying, I can't believe you've said so many negative things about the president. So I guess
even somebody last week sent me quite a lengthy, and if you're listening right now, I read it. I apologize that I didn't respond to it, but nevertheless I read it and I heard it. That again, it really is. It's just important for us, like Alberta said. We got to be champions of truth, and so Jesus had a propensity not necessarily to create safe spaces for his disciples, even those that were following after him. He was able to give some harsh words to them, but he was also able to challenge individuals that weren't with him as well. And I think that's especially important for Christians today as we're trying to operate and think through the political sphere. Like Alberta said, we want to champion and we want to celebrate when there's good that's being done, but we also, faithful are the wounds of a friend. We need to be able to to kind of unleash some of that.
And I learned that you don't always do everything right. I did not know that. That was news.
Alberta was wrong on that one. Let's just be honest there. I think I was right. I think Alberta was wrong. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you so much, Alberta, for your phone call. And we have got to go to a break right now, but we'll be taking some of your phone calls as well. So we'll continue talking about ending birthright citizenship. We kind of veered off it there a little bit. And so you can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And then we will also be taking some of your questions and comments on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And then we will be back right after this.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
So there's this guy named Jordan. He's a healthy guy. He's a dad of 6, and he works as a guide in Alaska. And he goes to the doctor, true story, he goes to the doctor and he's diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. And here's the thing. He had switched earlier from medical insurance to Medishare, where Christians share each other's medical bills. So the question for Jordan and his wife, Jenny, was, is this actually going to work?
Our medical bills exceeded $160,000. Medishare members shared all our bills.
And it was about more than just the money, too. This is a real community.
Medishare is a family, a group of people that stick with you through the hardest times of your life. I just don't know how I could have done it without Medishare.
It's so worth looking into. There's a reason this is growing so fast. So if you want to find out more, here is a number for you. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Kerby Anderson. We have been talking a little bit about birthright citizenship, kind of spinning back from what President Trump offered in the Axios interview, the idea that he could be ending birthright citizenship. We've been taking some of your phone calls relative to this. What do you think about it? Do you think it's a positive thing that this is something that we need to do? The 14th Amendment is that you err on that side, that it doesn't pertain to individuals that are simply just born here of unauthorized immigrant parents. And so you would say, no, sir, no, ma'am, that they do not belong here? Or would you err on the side of this is just one of the vestiges of the goodness of America, according to the American Enterprise Institute's piece, and that we just need to keep these individuals here? This is what we've been doing for a while, and so this is a positive good. Or are you erring on the side of individuals that think that we need to send it to Congress, and so Congress needs to do something with it? And so you can call in. We'd love to hear your comments on the idea of ending birthright citizenship, the idea of ending the anchor babies. And you can call in by calling in 800-351-1212, 800-351-1212. Now let's go ahead and let's jump on over to Arizona right now. We've got Helen in Arizona. Helen, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Helen, what's your point of view?
My point of view is that I'm 100% in favor of the president ending the birthright for babies.
Okay.
Because we live fairly close to the border, and the highway about 1.5 miles from my house, it has a lot of traffic of the illegals still coming across the border to have their babies. They have a lot of relatives that have already made it to town. And it is, as far as I'm concerned, it is a drain on our education system also, because the more they come, the more they bring their families. And they have a country. They have a country. And if we keep on taking them all in, just like the ones that are, I don't know how many, I think there's 9,000 or something that are trying to get in now from another country, but they're coming through Mexico, and Mexico is allowing it. I am 100% in favor of Donald Trump doing what he is planning to do, and I hope he is successful. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Helen. I think you bring up a great perspective, and also a different angle than what we've heard from is the educational impact on that. Kerby,
it's tremendous. It is tremendous. I worked in the school system in many places here in the state of Arizona. It's not just where I live. This town has totally suffered from having to build more schools, and there's a lot of care that goes on for these families and their children, and it's a very expensive, I don't care if some of them do get jobs, there's a lot of them that don't get jobs. Mm-hmm. So that's my opinion. Okay. Bye-bye. Thanks for taking my call.
Thank you so much, Helen. I think there's two components to that, especially from my conversations with teachers, Kerby, that I think would be pretty, would add to the conversation. The idea, one, you've just got teachers are being overwhelmed, or certain teachers in certain school systems.
You have this baby boomlet striking the schools right now. Very true.
So you've got that component. And then two, there's not a kind of a permanence there. So you have new students that move in the middle of the year, or they're leaving during a certain portion of the year. And so it's creating some of that movement in the classroom. And at the end of the day, as anyone can attest that's been in a classroom or spent any time in a classroom, you know that kind of the group dynamics of that classroom is pretty important. And so when you have one student, or you have a couple of students that end up falling behind, you've got to pay attention to them, or they end up, or they cause a disruption, or or something could happen that could be inhibitive for the whole class to be able to keep up with what's assigned to them, or what's the responsibility that they, at the particular benchmarks that they need to be around the year. And so that's just two things, Kerby, of ways in which these children, to a certain degree, are going. It provides opportunities and obstacles, I guess you would say.
Well, and you convinced me. I mean, Helen talked about the economic issues. You've talked about the social cohesion issues and the academic performance issues. You could add one more, and that is the goal has always been, when we had this idea of birthright citizenship, or even bringing immigrants here uncritically, was that we would have assimilation. But that's not taking place, as you well know. We've bantered around here a couple of times the fact that those under the age of 45 can't even pass the citizenship test. Less than 1 in 5 can pass the citizenship test. So we're in a situation where those individuals that are legal stood in line, took the classes, and took the test and passed it, know more about our history and our government than those people born here, either born here legally or illegally, either whether it was birthright citizenship or something else. So there's just a real need to bring together some social cohesion. And back to the question that Alberta and Helen and some of the others have been bringing up,
there's just a big question mark right now. And you've used the example that we should be umpires. Well, you watch a football game. Maybe you'll be even watching the Titans play the Cowboys here.
The Titans beat the Cowboys here.
Okay. He's already got the principal on there. All the people from Tennessee just cheered you for that, by the way. But, you recognize sometimes when a referee there's an uncertainty. And what do? They go to the television and they go to instant replay. We're kind of like in between that. Nobody really knows. Right now, we sort of have a de facto policy that's never really been ruled on by the Supreme Court, that when you're born here, even if your parents are here illegally, you're a citizen. And so there's some uncertainty about that. There's an uncertainty about whether or not we have 11 million, 22 million. Yeah. How many do we have? There's an uncertainty right now about how much contribution they make, how much cost they have. So there's just all this uncertainty. It's kind of like what happens when the field just stops and everybody races over to the replay videos to try to figure out what it is. And so I think there's a time right now for Congress and the Supreme Court to give us some rules that we can work on, because there's just too much uncertainty right now.
Yeah, and I think there's a distinction that needs to be made right now, because I think we're talking about two different things we're talking about two different constituencies to a certain degree. One, there are U.S. citizens that which would be the babies right now, because the rule it's clear the way that we've been ruling it. They're there. They're citizens. They are not. They're not citizens. Illegal immigrants. Yeah. They are citizens of the United States,
and they could vote.
And they are given the privilege and the opportunities therein. And so there's that component. And then Helen brings up the point that I think is important for us to be able to entertain, is the idea of illegal immigrants coming over here. And so, in the educational component, what we talked about from the financial standpoint, and then also the social cohesion standpoint, does stand. It deserves a discussion, to say the least, right now. Because in the absence of the discussion, especially from public policymakers, many teachers right now many of them, a vast majority of them, are already overwhelmed by the systems in which they're playing in right now and operating in. This is a very difficult conversation, especially when there's no clear guidance relative to public policy. So, all that to say, let's jump on over to another phone call. We've got Alex in Texas right now. Alex, are you there?
Yes, sir, I sure am.
Hey.
Thank you for taking my call.
Hey, Alex, where in Texas are you?
Amarillo, Texas, Panhandle.
Okay, so Alex, are you? I had to ask this. Are you a Titans fan, or are you a non-Christian? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding with you, Alex. What's your point of view?
You can tell us guys from Tennessee, can't you, Alex? Yeah. Oh boy, go ahead for it.
I'm a Dak Prescott fan. I like watching.
Man, he's a class act.
Yeah, we like him. Okay, what's on your mind?
Well, I think there's a key word in this anchor situation, and it's birth. And I think whoever brought up the conversation in the Trump administration in the first place, be it Trump himself, I don't know for sure, but I think it's a pretty good political genius move, because the Democrats, they seem to always fight him no matter what. Now they're going to have to admit that birth is important in the degree of the magnitude of the conversation at hand. And so what we can say on our side, as far as conservatives, is wait a minute. So you're defending the right to life.
Hey, I love that.
Yeah.
I was wondering if that's where you're going.
For non-Americans, but for Americans, you're saying, hey, you're not a baby yet. You're not even human.
Yeah.
So I'll let you guys take it from there. I think I'll grasp.
And I was just thinking about that a minute ago before Alex brought it up. I mean, one of the reasons why we can assimilate almost 1/3 babies born here to parents who are here illegally is because we're aborting more of those every single year. In some respects, we certainly have had fairly liberalized immigration laws because, as you well know, because you write the daily briefing every day, is the fertility rate has been dropping for years. And the only reason we have sort of a baby boomlet right now, where there's so many kids in these public schools, is because the baby boom moms, who were the part of the baby boom, had babies that are now of that age. But
fertility has been dropping, and our population would be declining like it is in Europe if it weren't for the fact that we have immigration, because we abort so many every year.
So true. And so we've got to take a break right now, but when we come back from the break, more on birthright citizenship. Is it a positive? Is it a negative? We'd love to hear from you. 800-351-1212, 800-351-1212, and we'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The U.S. Department of Justice recently announced that it will update the U.S. Attorney's Manual, creating a new section giving special attention to religious liberty. Updates to such a manual are sometimes viewed as routine, but they tend to reflect the values and priorities of the Department of Justice and function as a sort of roadmap for the department's coming years. The updates announced in the new manual requires the nation's U.S. attorneys to not only identify a dedicated point of contact on litigation having to do with religious liberty, but also requires coordination of any such litigation directly with the central office in Washington, D.C. In other words, Attorney General Sessions is announcing that his office will be very hands-on in lawsuits involving our first freedom. When the Department of Justice announced the updated U.S. Attorney's Manual, then Associate Attorney General Rachel Brand explained, quote, "Religious liberty is an inalienable right protected by the Constitution, and defending it is one of the most important things we do at the Department of Justice." Clearly, the days of abandoning protections in the law for religious liberty, including bipartisan laws like the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, may be a thing of the past. The critical leadership of the Attorney General and his staff to protect religious liberty for all Americans will do much to strengthen all of our core freedoms. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. For this last segment, we've got Kerby Anderson with us around the roundtable, and we've been talking a little bit about birthright citizenship. We've been talking a little bit about candy and how we're both great minds think alike, as well as eat candy alike, assault our teeth with technologically enhanced sugar that comes in the form of peanut butter cups. And so we are exceedingly grateful for Halloween and the candy therein. And so
I got one more question, though. I'm looking at the daily briefing here, and it says that 31 million Americans plan to dress up their furry friends.
You know, isn't that crazy? Isn't that crazy?
This is Halloween, and again, whether you celebrate or not, I mean, the number that take candy from their kids,
taking candy
and
from
then
their
dress up
kids.
their dogs and cats.
Yeah.
I did not know any of this until I read your daily briefing.
Yeah, so there is going to be so many people that are dressing up Fido like a pumpkin this year. I think that was the top one. I think it's 11% of pets will be dressed up as Fido, or dressed up as a pumpkin, and then with 2% will be a Star Wars character, but that's neither here nor there. Speaking of in galaxies far, far and away, let's talk about birthright citizenship, shall we? So we've been taking some of your phone calls right now about your thoughts on the idea of ending birthright citizenship. Do you think it's a positive? Do you think it's a negative? And what are your thoughts? Kind of all of this originated because of what President Trump said in an interview with Axios. The idea that he plans on kind of ending that. Senator Graham came in the next day and said that he planned on drafting up legislation to end that. So President Trump wants to do it through an executive order. Senator Graham wants to do it through legislation. And many are wondering, even if these things get enacted, what the Supreme Court would happen to say about these things. And so we're going to be taking some phone calls right now, and we're going to continue to take a phone call. We've got Mike right now in Texas right now. Mike, are you there?
Yes, sir, I am.
Okay, so Mike, where are you from in Texas?
Well, I'm in Nacogdoches, the oldest town in Texas right now. But
yes.
Live here in East Texas.
Okay, so are you a Texan fan? Are you a Cowboys fan? Who are we talking to here?
You are talking to an Astros fan, and since they started kneeling, I don't watch football anymore.
Oh, wow. Here we go.
You got to love the Astros, even though they ended up losing to the Boston Red Sox, which were outstanding this year.
Best team ever.
Astros are a great team.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, I want to remind your listeners and perhaps you guys of what Thomas Jefferson said, and this is in reference to the 14th Amendment. He said in question of the intent of a law that was being written, and I'm paraphrasing, it is important to go back and read the documents around that law. And I guarantee you, they had nothing to do with anchor babies.
Nope.
That 14th Amendment had to do with the end of slavery and how our citizens were being treated by our fellow citizens. It had nothing to do with taking advantage of a blurred interpretation of the 14th Amendment nowadays. That's all I had to say, guys.
Let me give you your quote because it's really a very famous quote, and that is Thomas Jefferson said, "On every question of construction of the Constitution, let us carry ourselves back to the time when the Constitution was adopted, recollect the spirit manifested in the debates, and instead of trying what meaning might be squeezed out of the text, intended against it, conform it to the probable one in which it was passed," which is a long way of saying that it basically says what my latest book on constitutional interpretation says. And Mike is right, because when you go back and look at those individuals, as we talked about earlier with Brian, that actually put forward the 14th Amendment, and you look at the other particular legislation that at the time was used as a model, you can see they were talking about people that were having an allegiance to another foreign country. So if you really want to do what's called originalism, it's best to go back and look at the original ruling. And what I think is so disturbing to me is, let me just use one example. You know, I love reading the Wall Street Journal, but here's a good example of, this is stupid. You know, Trump doesn't even know what he's talking about. And I'm going, no, I mean, actually, if you go back to the original writing, that is the case. And so whether it's on one side saying, of course this is what was intended, or the other side that says this is stupid, it's a little more nuanced. And I hope if anything that people have been listening over the last couple of hours here to just understand that if you want to understand the original intent, go back to the 19th century. It's pretty obvious what the original intent was. It was to grant citizenship to slaves who were brought here against their will. It was also an attempt to, in a sense, overturn Dred Scott, the decision by the Supreme Court.
That's good. Anyway. And so let's keep on taking, we'll take one more phone call right now. We'll go to Kansas, and we've got Jennifer. Jennifer, are you there?
Yes.
Hey, Jennifer, what's your point of view?
My point of view is all of this talk, and it's very discriminatory against immigrants, especially those in Mexico. The last call, the caller before Mike was saying how they come across the borders, all these people, just to have babies. I don't know if she knows for sure that all the people coming across the borders are illegal and they're coming here just to have babies. That's not right. I just have a problem with people saying that Mexico is letting all these immigrants in and doing nothing to stop it. That is false. They have turned away a lot of people. Not all of those people are asylum seekers. A lot of it is political. It happens every year. And so all of those people that are in the caravan, it gets less and less and less as they get closer to the border. I don't know if you've ever been across the border driving. It is not as easy as what people say. Mm-hmm. My in-laws are from Mexico, and if I drive across, we get across in 15 minutes, 20 minutes. If my husband, who is legal, is to drive across, they pull him over every time because of the color of his skin. I think this isn't fair. I think people need to slow down their roll when it comes to immigrants, people coming from across the border. And I think it would be a lot simpler and be very easy to help stop a lot of this if we would have a guest worker. Who's going to pick the food? I mean, there's so much food that rots off, and no white person, no black person, nobody wants to do that job. And people just sit there and demonize and keep creating it bigger and bigger and bigger because this is the topic that is scaring people, because then the white people will no longer have the majority. And I think people need to really look, just sit down and just really look and see, because these were the people that were originally from North America, people in Mexico. They didn't come across on a boat. So, I mean, we just need to take time and slow down. And, yes, we do need to secure our borders, but let's talk fairly instead of creating this about all this hate, because I can guarantee you that there wouldn't be so many cartels if we could get jobs in places and yes, get all these high up people that are in the government.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. We greatly appreciate you, and thank you all so much for joining us today on Point of View, and we'll be back here tomorrow. But until then, hope you have a great day.
From Graceworks Pictures comes Indivisible, based on the true story of Army Chaplain Darren Turner and his wife, Heather.
It is with great honor that I have served my country, but I only stand before you today because Jesus is my rock, and because I have a family who loves and believes in me.
One marriage, one family, under God. Indivisible. Rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13. Now playing. More information is available at indivisiblemovie.com.
A major problem with socialism is that it allows people to benefit from the hard work of others. It permits the idle and indifferent to live off the efforts of their neighbors. For a society to prosper, everyone who is able has to contribute. And that's the only way Point of View Radio can bring you truth. We are profoundly thankful for you who have joined the Truth Team and make this program possible. If you're not on board, join today. Invest in our future together. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View.